They say there are places the maps refuse to draw. Places where compasses spin endlessly and the stars above seem incomplete. This is one of those places. A land no sailor has ever claimed to reach. And yet, one man swore he had been there. It began on a night when the sea was not itself. The winds came from two directions at once, and the waves rose like black walls. Some called it a storm. But in the journals of Luke Van, he wrote that it was the ocean calling him. His ship, a small merchant vessel, was swallowed whole by the storm before dawn. He should have died that night. But instead, he woke on a shore he could not name. He opened his eyes to the sound of water breathing. Slow, deep, as if the tide itself was alive. Mist clung to the air, and beyond it, shapes began to move. Not shapes of palm trees, nor the wooden huts of fishing villages, but towers that shimmered like pearl, and bridges strung as thin as harp strings. He tried to speak, but his throat burned with salt. And then, they appeared. They were unlike anyone he had ever seen. Their armor, if it could be called that, was woven from silver threads, light enough to flow with their steps, yet sharp where it needed to be. No men stood among them. No boys hid behind them. Only women, watching him with eyes that held neither fear nor welcome, but something in between. One stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her gaze cut like a blade. "Do not move," she said. Another figure emerged from behind the mist. She wore no armor, only a robe of pale silk, its edges darkened by the morning dew. She knelt beside him. Her hand, cool against his wrist, measured the beat of his pulse. "Steady," she whispered. "The sea has not claimed you yet." It was then Luke Van realized. He was the only man on the shore. And from the way they looked at him, it was clear they had not seen one in a very, very long time. The women did not speak much at first. They moved with quiet precision, lifting Luke Van to his feet, supporting him with a firmness that left no room for resistance. Through the mist, the land unfolded. What he had thought were towers were in fact shells the size of houses, their surfaces glistening with layers of mother-of-pearl. Bridges curved gently above narrow canals, and the water below was so clear, he could see fish flashing silver in the depths. They led him into a wide plaza. The air here was warmer, carrying the scent of salt, mixed with something sweeter, like crushed blossoms. Everywhere, women paused their work to watch. Some wore light armor, others long flowing robes of colors that shifted with the light. Not a single man among them. One of the women from the shore, the one who had measured his pulse, stepped forward and spoke. Her voice carried easily, clear enough to echo off the shell-like walls. "He will come with us, to the Hall of Breath." The Hall of Breath stood at the heart of the city. Its roof was shaped like a great wave, frozen at the moment before it crashed. Inside, the air was thick with mist, and shafts of light streamed down through openings above. In the center lay a length of pale silk, stretched taut between carved pillars. On the floor around it, shallow bowls of water reflected the ceiling. "This is the song on," the woman explained. "It is how we greet a traveler from beyond the mist." Two women guided Luke Van onto the silk. It was cool beneath his feet. They positioned him so his shadow fell across the fabric. From somewhere unseen, a low, rhythmic drum began to sound. One of the women stepped close, so close he could hear the sound of her breathing. Her hands moved in deliberate patterns, tracing the air just above his skin. The others watched his shadow shift and ripple upon the silk. They studied the shape of his stance, the line of his shoulders, the rise and fall of his chest. When it was done, the woman who had spoken before nodded once. "His breath matches the tide," she said. "He may stay." Luke Van did not know it yet, but in this city, those words were not merely an invitation. They were a binding. From the moment the ceremony ended, Luke Van's life in the city of pearl and mist began to change. The women moved him into a tall shell-shaped dwelling, its walls lined with woven mats that smelled faintly of salt and flowers. Each morning, trays of fruit, fresh fish, and warm bread appeared at his door. No one asked if he wanted them. They simply arrived. When he walked through the streets, eyes followed him. Some curious, some calculating, and others holding a warmth that lingered a little too long. The air here was soft, but heavy with scents. Oil from crushed petals, the sharpness of sea herbs, and the faint musk of skin warmed by the sun. One evening, he was invited, no, escorted, to a gathering in the Moon Pavilion. The structure stood on stilts above the water, its floor made of glassy panels through which fish could be seen drifting below. Lanterns hung from the beams, their light shimmering across the surface of the lagoon. Women reclined on cushions, their laughter low and musical. Some wore robes of translucent silk, others simple wraps that left one shoulder bare. At the center, a woman rose to greet him. It was the one who had first spoken to him on the shore. The tall warrior with eyes like tempered bronze. "I am DM Ko," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone used to command. "You are the first in many generations to come from beyond the mist." As they spoke, other women drew closer, bringing him cups of a warm, amber drink. It was sweet at first, but with a heat that bloomed slowly in his chest. A hand brushed his arm, light, casual. Another adjusted the cushion behind his back. The circle around him tightened. There was no malice in their touch, only a quiet hunger. It was a hunger that made the air warmer, that filled the space between each breath. That night, as he returned to his dwelling, the streets were quiet, but shadows moved in the corners. He realized then, in this place where no man had walked for lifetimes, he was not just a guest. He was a prize. The gifts no longer stopped at sunset. They arrived with the dawn, and stayed deep into the night. Women came in pairs, in threes, sometimes alone. They carried trays of fruit split open so the juice glistened in the lamplight. Robes light as a sigh. Small vials of oil that smelled of rain on warm stone. When they spoke, their voices were low, words lingering like the last note of a song. When they laughed, it was softer still, like silk brushing across skin. One evening, two women came just as the lanterns were being lit. One poured wine into his cup, her fingers grazing his knuckles, while the other sat close enough for her thigh to press against his. The wine was sweet, but the warmth that spread through him was not from the drink. They leaned in, their hair falling forward, a faint trace of perfume mixing with the salt of the sea. One whispered something in his ear. He couldn't hear the words, only feel the shape of them against his skin. Later that night, he lay on the woven mat, the sound of the tide pulsing faintly beyond the walls. Footsteps approached, soft, bare, unhurried. A shadow filled the doorway, and a figure stepped in, carrying a small lamp. The glow traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. She knelt beside him, placing the lamp on the floor. Her hand found his, cool at first, then warmer as her fingers slid between his. Without speaking, she leaned forward, her forehead brushing his. Her breath tasted faintly of the sweet wine from earlier. When her lips touched his, it was slow, a question waiting for an answer. The pattern repeated, but never the same way twice. One night, it was a woman with skin like sun-warmed bronze, pressing a ripe slice of fruit to his lips, then tasting the same fruit from his hand. Another night, it was two sisters, laughing softly as they took turns braiding his hair, their fingers trailing down the back of his neck longer than necessary. There was the woman who brought scented oil, pouring a drop into her palm before smoothing it across his shoulders. Her touch was deliberate, following the line of muscle down his back, pausing just long enough for him to notice her pause. There was the one who lay beside him, her arm draped loosely over his chest, her cheek resting against his bare shoulder, as if listening to the beat of his heart. At first, he told himself it was harmless, a game of curiosity. But the more it happened, the more he felt the walls of the city closing in. Everywhere he went, there were eyes. In the market, in the hallways, in the quiet corners of the garden. Every glance lingered. Every smile hinted. Every touch asked for something. One morning, he woke to find a woven sash hanging across his doorway. Its threads were deep red, twined with silver. When Diemko saw it, her jaw tightened. Her voice was quiet, but sharp. "It's not just a decoration," she said. "It's a claim. Someone has marked you as theirs." The red and silver sash hung across the doorway like a silent guard. Every time Luke Van looked at it, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. The women in the streets no longer approached with the playful curiosity of before. Now their glances were sharper, measuring. Some smiled faintly, others looked away as if the claim had already been settled. That night, the moon was high, casting silver light across the canals. The air was thick with the smell of salt and something sweeter. A scent he recognized from the oil the women used in their hair. He was not alone for long. The door curtain shifted, and a figure entered. She wore a robe of deep crimson, the fabric slipping from one shoulder as she moved. In her hands, a small tray with a clay cup and a bowl of fruit glistening with juice. She set the tray down, then looked at him without speaking. Her steps were slow, bare feet whispering across the mat. When she reached him, she knelt, and with a single motion, lifted a piece of fruit to his lips. Her fingers brushed the corner of his mouth. The taste was sweet, but the warmth that followed came from the closeness of her breath. Before the moment could fade, another shadow appeared in the doorway. This one carried a small oil lamp, its glow painting her features in amber light. Without a word, she moved behind him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. The scent of heated oil filled the air. Her thumbs pressed slowly into the muscles at the base of his neck, tracing the line down toward his spine. Each movement was unhurried, as if the night itself had nowhere else to be. The first woman leaned closer, her knee brushing his. Her hand rested on his forearm, fingers drawing invisible shapes against his skin. Then, a faint sound, like silk sliding over wood. Another entered. Her robe shimmered in the lamplight, and her eyes never left his. She settled on the other side, one hand reaching up to sweep a strand of hair from his face, her fingertips grazing his cheekbone, pausing at the edge of his jaw. It was as if the air itself had thickened. For hands moved now, some steady, some searching. Each contact brief enough to be denied, but long enough to leave its mark. One pair of lips brushed his temple, light as breath. Another passed close to his ear, a whisper without words. He could feel the heat of them, skin against skin, through the thinnest barrier of cloth. When the moon dipped toward the horizon, they slipped away, one by one, leaving behind the scent of fruit, oil, and something he could not name. Luke Van sat in the quiet, the sash still hanging in the doorway, and understood at last. It was not just a claim. It was a promise. And a warning. The night they came for him, the air was heavier than usual. The city's canals lay still, reflecting the moon like polished stone. From his doorway, Luke Van could see lanterns moving in the distance. Not along the streets, but across the narrow bridges that led toward the inner quarter. A soft knock came. When he opened the curtain, two women stood there, both cloaked in midnight blue silk, faces half hidden beneath thin veils. Without a word, they gestured for him to follow. They led him through winding passages lit only by oil lamps. The walls here were close, lined with shell tiles that shimmered faintly with each flicker of flame. The air carried a mixture of scents: salt, crushed flowers, and the deep musk of something warmer. At the end of the passage, a tall door opened to reveal a chamber bathed in amber light. Silk drapes swayed lightly in the warm draft, and the floor was covered in layered mats soft enough to sink into. They brought him inside. More women were waiting. Some sat cross-legged on the mats, others reclined against cushions, their robes loose, slipping from shoulders in a way that revealed more shadow than skin. In the center, a low table held bowls of fruit glistening with syrup, pitchers of golden drink, and small clay dishes filled with aromatic oil. One woman approached him first. The red sash at her waist marked her as the one who had claimed him. Her veil fell away as she smiled. "You've been called to the night of the marked," she said. Her hand rose to touch his cheek, her thumb brushing the edge of his mouth. What followed was less ceremony than sensation. 2 women poured the golden drink into his cup, their fingers grazing his as they passed it to him. Another knelt behind him, her hands sliding across his shoulders, spreading a thin warmth from the oil in her palms. The room seemed to move with him. Everywhere he turned, there was someone close enough for her knee to press into his thigh, for her hair to fall over his arm, for her breath to touch his neck. One fed him fruit, the syrup dripping onto his hand before she leaned in to taste it herself. Another rested her forehead against his temple, her lips brushing the skin there as she murmured something he couldn't hear. When he closed his eyes, he could feel them. Skin against skin. The thinnest veil of silk between them. Heat blooming wherever their hands lingered. Hours passed in a rhythm of touch and retreat. Fingers along his jaw. Palms sliding to the curve of his back. Lips finding the corners of his mouth. Pausing just long enough for him to lean into them. He lost track of how many there were, or which hands belonged to whom. All he knew was the steady pulse of warmth in the air, and the way it carried him deeper into the night. When it was over, he lay among scattered cushions, the scent of fruit and oil clinging to his skin. The red sash woman knelt beside him once more, her smile softer now. "You are ours," she whispered. "From tonight on, you belong to the mist." The morning after the night of the marked, the city felt different. It was quieter, but not with peace, with watchfulness. Everywhere Luke Van walked, eyes followed. Some carried the softness of the night before, others the edge of something possessive. The red and silver sash was gone from his doorway. In its place hung a thin strand of pearls, each one irregular, as if shaped by a restless tide. DMCO came at midday. She did not enter immediately, only stood in the doorway, her shadow cutting across the light. "You have been bound," she said simply. Her gaze swept over him, as if checking for something unseen. When he asked what it meant, her voice stayed level. "It means, the mist will not let you go." That night, sleep would not come. Every creak of the wooden walls, every ripple of the water below, felt like someone approaching. And then, a whisper. Not outside. Inside. It came from the far side of the room, where the shadows pooled thickest. A figure emerged, veiled in pale silk, her face hidden, but her movements fluid, like water carrying a secret. She crossed to him in silence. Her hands, cool at first, brushed the side of his neck. When her veil slipped, he saw the curve of her lips. A smile, faint and unreadable. Her touch was light, but there was purpose in it. She leaned closer, and the silk between them shifted, bearing the warmth of her shoulder against his chest. Her lips brushed his jaw, then paused just short of his mouth. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than breath. "You don't belong to them," she whispered. "You belong to yourself." Before he could reply, she pressed something into his hand. A folded scrap of woven map. It smelled faintly of salt and smoke. "Follow the tide's shadow," she said. On the next moonless night. And then she was gone, slipping back into the mist as if it had never opened for her. That was when Luke Van understood. The city's beauty was a net, and he was no longer drifting inside it. He was caught. And now, he had one chance to escape. The night came sooner than he expected. A moonless sky draped the city in layers of shadow. The air was warm and heavy, thick with the scent of oil lamps and the faint perfume of flowers pressed into hair. Luke Van moved through the streets with quiet steps. Every bridge and turning alley felt longer than it should, as if the city itself were stretching to hold him inside. The scrap of woven map lay hidden inside his robe, its texture rough against his chest. Follow the tide's shadow, the veiled woman had told him. And so he would. But the city was not sleeping. Lanterns burned in windows. Silhouettes moved along the balconies above. Soft laughter floated down, accompanied by the rustle of silk. At one narrow bridge, a figure stepped into his path. She wore a robe the color of deep wine, loosely tied at the waist. Her voice was gentle. "Where are you going, stranger?" She moved closer, her hand brushing the sleeve of his robe. The movement pulled her nearer still, until her breath warmed his cheek. Before he could answer, another shape emerged from the shadows. Then another, and another. Soon, 3 women stood around him. Their eyes glimmered in the lamplight, their smiles slow and knowing. One touched his hair, twining a strand between her fingers. Another rested a hand on his chest, the silk of her sleeve sliding down to bare her arm. The third stepped behind him, her palms resting lightly on his waist. "Stay," she whispered. "Just for tonight." For a moment, the tide's call faltered. The warmth of their closeness, the weight of their touch, the way the air seemed to thicken with every breath. It pulled at him like the current he was trying to escape. One of them pressed her forehead to his, her lips brushing the corner of his mouth. Another leaned in, her cheek grazing his jaw, the faint scent of jasmine trailing after her movement. The woman behind him slid her hands higher along his ribs, her fingers curling against the fabric. Her voice was no louder than the sea's sigh. "You could be ours. All of ours." But then, from somewhere far below, he heard it. The deep, steady surge of water pulling outward. The tide's shadow. He stepped back, breaking the circle. Their hands lingered for a heartbeat, then slipped away. No one stopped him, but their eyes followed, as he crossed the bridge and vanished into the deeper mist. The mist thickened as Luke Van moved deeper into the city's outer reaches. The lamps here were fewer, their light swallowed quickly by the darkness. He followed the sound of water pulling away, a deep, rhythmic breath that seemed to guide his steps. The woven scrap in his robe was warm from his body, its frayed edge brushing against his skin as if urging him onward. The streets narrowed until they became nothing more than stone paths between water. At the end of one such path, the mist broke open to reveal a hidden inlet. A single boat swayed gently, its hull black against the faint shimmer of the tide. He was not alone. A figure stood at the boat's edge, her robe pale as the mist around her. The veil she had worn that night was gone. It was the same woman who had given him the map. "You found it," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his as if to confirm something. "You have minutes," she continued. "When the tide turns, it will close again for another season." Before he could step forward, movement caught his eye. From the shadows at the water's edge, shapes emerged. 4, 5 more. Women. Not veiled. Not hiding. They moved toward him in silence, robes slipping from shoulders, bare feet soundless on the stone. The lamplight from the boat caught their faces. Some he recognized from the moon pavilion, others from the night of the marked. One reached him first. Her hand found his cheek, her thumb brushing the corner of his mouth. Another stood close behind, fingers light on his forearm. "Stay," one murmured. "You know what awaits you here." A third moved nearer, her shoulder pressing to his, her hair spilling over his arm. The scent of jasmine, salt, and the faintest trace of oil filled his breath. The woman with the map did not move. Her gaze was fixed on him, not with anger, but with something sharper. Urgency. "You have to choose," she said. "Now." The closest woman leaned in, her lips brushing his jaw. Another's fingers slid along his hand, interlacing with his. The one behind him rested her forehead to his neck, her breath warm against his skin. It was the same Ned as before. The softness, the closeness, the promise that nothing outside these walls could compare. But the tide surged again, louder this time, the pull unmistakable. The boat rocked gently, ready to leave. Luke Van took a step back. The hands tightened for an instant, then loosened, falling away one by one. He stepped into the boat. The woman in pale robes untied the rope. The last thing he saw before the mist swallowed them both was the women standing at the edge, watching, not calling out, not moving, just watching. The mist did not break all at once. It thinned slowly, letting the cold light of dawn seep through in pale streaks. Luke Van sat in silence at the bow of the boat. The woman in pale robes rowed with steady strokes, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind them, the city was already gone, swallowed back into the white. He told himself not to look back, but his hands still remembered the warmth, his skin the weight of every touch. his lips the soft press of others. The scent of fruit and oil clung to him even here, in the sharp salt air beyond the mist. When the sun finally rose, the world was empty but for the sea. No islands, no towers of pearl, no sign that such a place had ever existed. The woman stopped rowing. "This is where I leave you," she said. Her voice was softer now, but her eyes carried the same urgency as before. "You will think of them," she continued. "They will think of you. But the mist will not open again, unless it chooses." He wanted to ask her name, but she had already stepped to the stern. A moment later, the boat tipped lightly as she slipped into the water without a sound. The ripples closed over her, and she was gone. For days, he drifted. When at last he was found by a passing merchant ship, he said nothing of the city of pearl and mist. Not to the captain, not to the crew, but at night, when the deck was quiet and the sea was calm, he would close his eyes, and feel again the weight of silk on his skin, the press of a forehead to his, the whisper of breath at his ear. Years later, in the journals he left behind, he wrote only one line about that voyage. "There are places the maps will never draw, and there are tides that pull at you long after you've escaped them."